What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a PO Box, and I don't think Locals, Patreon. And all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. Luke, good to see you again. You're the seventh person from our high school, or from the high school that I grew up in, Strongsville, that has been on the show.
Go Mustangs.
I mean, what was I thinking? Well, I should have been hanging around. Well, you're a little bit older than me, but I should have been hanging around some of you guys, and the entrepreneur and the artistry, and who knew, right?
You could have played end guard and tackle on the football team like me, right? You sit at the end of the bench, you guard the water, you tackle anybody who tries to take it. It was a good job.
But who would ever thought like Strongsville, Ohio? I mean, I don't think Brunswick had, not to knock Brunswick or Medina or North Royalton or anything, but who would ever thought that Strongsville produced some of the entrepreneurs, artists, and
It's incredible. We were just saying offline, in addition to the seven you've got, Taylor Swift's guitarist, Paul Sidoti, is a Strongsville guy. He grew up in Strongsville, Ohio. I don't know. I know it was in the water, but you know what? Hats off to the Strongsville High School teaching staff of the 1990s and 1980s. They must have done a decent job. I think they did a great job for me.
well, and you're somebody who's seen a lot of different places. I'm assuming you've traveled all over, but you've chosen to stay in Northeast Ohio. We'll talk about Northeast Ohio for a second, then we'll get into the solving the world's problems. But why have you stayed for so long?
At first, it was a career decision, and that career decision was pretty straightforward. Well, I went to University of Cincinnati. They had a co-op program. I went to school a quarter, worked a quarter, every other quarter. Um, I wanted to be by my then girlfriend, now wife, as often as I could. She was at Ashland University and then graduated. She was a little bit older than me. And so I found a co-op position in Cleveland. And it ended up being a great position. They hired me out of school. And then went into institutional equity sales there. And part of the attraction of that was I was going to be on straight commission, which meant whatever I kill, I get a chunk of, I get to eat. And to me, I like betting on myself. 2000, I actually had a very attractive offer to go to New York City and work for a very highly respected name brand firm that everyone would know. And it came that they too actually were one of it really came down to when you looked at the money, it was this bigger, more well-established firm probably would be easier to sell equity research. Um, but it was basically uh, in nominal dollars, 20-30% more money for a cost of living that was probably at least double relative to my standard of living here in Cleveland. And the firm I was at, again, was rapidly growing. I could see that we were doing really well. I had an equity stake in this firm, and I was getting to keep 20% of whatever I brought in the door, 22% of whatever I brought in the door. And so, quite frankly, uh, when I say business decision, I was arbitraging the the explosion of what I would call sort of the hedge fund industry, right? The hedge fund industry really took off kind of 94, 95 through '05, maybe 2010. Huge amount of assets flowing to hedge funds, huge amount of increase in trading volumes, huge increase in interest in bottoms up fundamental research, of which my firm in Cleveland was one of the pioneers. And I had an equity stake and I was getting 20% of everything I brought in the door permanently. Everything came in the door every day, from the accounts I was calling on, I got 20% of. And so, to be blunt, business decision, all my family was here. My wife's from here. I'm from here. My extended family's here. Her extended family's here. And I would have to take a pay cut to go to New York, a nominal pay cut. And I'd have to take at least, 50 or 60% real living standard pay cut to go to New York or go to LA or to go to Chicago. And so for me, like it never made sense from a business standpoint. It never made sense from a from a family standpoint, especially once we started having kids. It's so nice having your parents around, having your family around. And so early on, it was kind of like relationship business decision. And, you know, the longer it goes on, it continued to be somewhat of a business decision. When I started FFTT, look, the biggest two costs for any small business, if you're an entrepreneur, your cost of housing, your cost of educating your kids, quality education. There's a lot of cities in this country, you can't send your kids to public school. You can't. And where we are in Cleveland, that's absolutely not the case. The public schools around Cleveland and many, many neighborhoods are extraordinary. And the private schools are extraordinary. And the extraordinary private schools are dirt cheap relative to anywhere else that I would want to do this and the cost of shelter. So I could actually start a business in Cleveland, have high quality education for my children, have high quality shelter for my family, and not have to take outside investors who could tell me how to do things, which I don't like to do. I don't like to be told how to do things. So that's the business side of it. More recently, the longer this fourth turning goes on, other than February, January, February, March, which you were talking off air, where the weather kind of stinks, Cleveland is one of the only places in the world where you are above carrying capacity for energy, food, water, infrastructure, and nobody wants to be here, right? I'm a contrarian. Next time, say, hey, how would you think about living in Cleveland? And then just watch people's reaction. Beautiful. Don't come here. It sucks. I don't want you here. None of us want you here. Don't come. It's terrible. So it's really turned into a quality of living standpoint where, you got to get the heck out of here because it really does suck in January, February, and March.
This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike. I'm smiling while you're describing that because I'm going to have to take that soundbite, Luke, you talking about Cleveland, because people that know me, and I think now you probably have a sense, the second time that we've spoken, I love Cleveland. I'm like the biggest Cleveland. In fact, people had said to me, they're like, you should get a job at the airport of Cleveland. That way when people get off the plane, you'll be right there in a booth talking about how great this place is. And the joke is, I always say it's the world's best kept secret is Cleveland, Ohio. So you saying that, and you said it, you described it much better than I would have in terms of the resources that are there. I used to live in Pennsylvania too. I think Pennsylvania is another state, and you probably could say Indiana and Michigan are in that category. But you have the Great Lakes, you have water. Like I live in a place that obviously doesn't have water, and yet they continue to build and build and build and build here. As we go through this fourth turning, I think the Midwest, in particular Northeast Ohio, I don't think is a bad place to be.
No, it's little things, right? You can have like one of these ridiculous showers in your bathroom where you're like getting sprayed like it's coming over Niagara Falls or something, and you can leave it on. You want to take a half-hour long shower and use gazillions of gallons of water. So what? It's free. You can't do that. And if you can't now, you soon won't be able to in a lot of these drier places in the country, or overpopulated parts of the country, or at the very least, you're going to have to pay for the privilege of doing so. And it's just those kinds of things. You can get anywhere here in half an hour. We have what I'm going to talk about with the Cleveland Metro Parks, right? It's this unbelievable. Every time someone comes here and visits me, they're like, wait, there's a ring of parks that goes from the west side of Cleveland around it like a necklace. They literally call it the Emerald Necklace around the city, all the way to the east side, from one side of the lake to the other. And it's like a mile wide area of parks with rivers and trails like the whole way. I'm like, yeah, yeah. And then, down here at the bottom southeast corner, it hooks up to a national park. So like half an hour, you can get to national parks, and it ain't the Grand Canyon, but it's pretty darn nice, in terms of wilderness. It's underpopulated. Uh, the infrastructure in Cleveland's all built for the 1950s and 60s when we were the fifth largest metropolis in the country. There's a reason why our area code's 216, right? New York's 212 because that's where the most calls were. Then 213 is LA, 214 is Dallas, 215 is Philly, 216 is Cleveland for a reason,
I didn't know
right?
that.
It's yeah, you did 212 is because of the most common interchange when they were literally plugging them in. It's easier to, the highest volume of calls you want, right? You want those the 212, easiest, 212, 212, 213. We're 216. So all this infrastructure was built for when there were way more people here. And then they all left and went to Florida and Texas and Carolina and wherever else they went. Infrastructure's still here. So like literally you can almost get anywhere here in half hour, which is nice. There's just little things like that. Cost of living is still low, although it's rising. We're sort of like the last people, houses here are probably up 40 to 60% in the last 5, 6 years. Um, but it's nice.
Well, and even from a crime standpoint too, you're out in the suburbs. Obviously cities they all have their challenges, and to me they're all they're deteriorating. But you're far enough away in the suburbs. I don't know. I've always felt more at ease in Northeast Ohio where we grew up, even still to this day, than even where I'm at in Phoenix.
And I think too, there's still this is as close as I'll get to talking politics. It's still relatively sane here. We don't agree on everything. We do have a widening gap between left and right here. There's no question. And it is still relatively sane about the politics of everything here. It's still the American Midwest. It's not some of the more extremist one way or another in going in either direction that you're having in these other places. Yeah, the cities they're not doing well. The city here, I don't think is doing particularly well. But it's kind of finding its way, and the suburbs are world class. The educations are world class in a lot of those suburbs, particularly. So I agree with you. It's a very well kept secret. Other than January through March, that's not so much.
And you don't have the homeless population either, like we do in Phoenix or other cities with warmer climates, because again that's where the winter keeps some of that at bay. It keeps all of that at bay.
Yeah, it's harsh. It is. The winters here are harsh, and there's various shelters and stuff. My wife and I are big supporters of the Cleveland Food Bank uh, because we have a lot of empathy for that. I can't imagine how difficult it is, but it is not. When I go to other warmer cities, I am consistently surprised by um, the extent of the homeless population, and it's not as big here.
Do you now, as you've talked about on your other interviews in regards to the fourth turning? You were expressing. I heard your conversation with Natalie. It's I don't not you didn't say the word uneasy, but like the where things are at right now, where they're heading. Do you not feel good about where we're at right now in the country? I don't know how to say
Um,
it, Luke. I couldn't put the words together.
yeah, no, it's. I think you said it all. I am increasingly uneasy with the direction that things are going, and I feel that way because of the history I have read and the history I continue to read. And it's rhyming so much. And I think one of the charms of America is its view of exceptionalism. I think and its optimism. And I think one of the riskiest blind spots of America it's got exceptionalism and its optimism. And as I see the weaponization of laws, I see like this stuff has all happened before. You read the book. I think I cited it in a conversation with Natalie, the Storm Before the Storm, written by Mike Duncan about late Republic Rome, and it's literally the same discussions we're having today, almost verbatim. And it's one side does this, the other side gets into power, does it a little bit more aggressively. The other side takes power back, does it more aggressively, and this is tit for tat until the killing starts. And I'm seeing the accelerating tit for tat, and I'm really hoping we've got some wisdom to sort of de-escalate. And you know, but it's I think super important to kind of get out there and get in your community and touch grass and get off the social media, because I think the social media, and I have a somewhat unique view as a fairly large following as far as followings go on X. Um, you get on X and like you get the feeling like civil war is coming to America in 6 months and or maybe 2 years. And that's probably not right. Then you go out and you talk to people in the community and you go have dinner with someone and even someone you don't agree with politically. And you're like, it's still America. We're still pragmatic. We can still talk to each other. I don't agree with you, but I respect you and I will defend your right to say this, that, or the other. In these parts, that is still the case. It is discouraging to see that type of discourse seem to break down elsewhere, but that's that's why I'm getting discouraged when you see that and you see the sign markers of the escalation, right? When you have a CEO assassinated in the streets of Manhattan, when you have um, some of the what we saw with the killing of Charlie Kirk and some of these other types of things, they are warnings from the universe. Like, they're warnings.
Well, and the killer of the CEO of United Healthcare, I mean, they turned that guy into a celebrity, right? I mean, they turned him into some like folk hero, some people. And that's what like I was like, wow, look where we're at as a country, that this guy has now been glorified for killing somebody.
It's yeah, and it's hard because when you strip away a lot of, I think some of those people are nuts. When you strip away some of the rational people that feel at least a sense of Schadenfreude, if not, celebration of that, I think what you find is that the driver to that on a first principle basis is the healthcare system in this country, this healthcare for profit dynamic that he was a figurehead of. That's what he did, right? He was the figurehead or one of the chief figureheads of the biggest healthcare insurer in the country. Um, and when you look at the challenges and the very hot emotions that triggers, right? That man was the representation of an organization who decides whether somebody who somebody else loves very, very deeply gets a cancer treatment or doesn't get a cancer treatment. These are very, very sensitive political issues. And I think those are the things that are underlying this. And then when you overlay what we're seeing, which is our policymakers are trying to figure out if they want to be America the empire or America the country. And America the empire requires you to tell cancer patients, sorry, you can't get the medicine because we have to give the money to foreign countries over here to do what? So because America the empire needs to control this border with that country, uh, that then leads to further sort of fanning of these flames of that underlying anger. I mean, there was Ian Bremmer on X had a picture of a billboard in New York City that showed we don't want Greenland, we want healthcare, and that's sort of a manifestation of the underlying tension around why would someone celebrate the killing of another person? Like they didn't know him. I'm sure he was a fine, decent man by all appearances. So why would anyone do that? And I think the answer is the anger around an organization that makes a decision, live or die, at a time when we as a country politically are spending, we clearly have the money, right? We have the money to do this, yet we're not spending it on, and whether it's, cancer patients here, whether it's infrastructure here, whether it's whatever here, we have been so underinvesting in America for 40 years, and in particular the last 30 years, in the interest of supporting America, the empire. And I think that is like a fundamental tension that is manifesting in some of these things. And part of the reason I'm so discouraged is you don't sit down and arbitrate, do we want to be America the country or America the empire, like over a coffee at lunch and then shake hands and decide it's done. There's so much money, so much power, so much inertia to these forces, to the America the empire force, and inertia to the hollowing out of America the country, that it is a political hot wire to say the least. Like these are not things that are resolved and like, oh yeah, okay, let's hug and hold hands and have a Coke.
Yeah, and well, and also, I mean, I had an opportunity last summer to drive around to a variety of different places, with Ohio and through Virginia, and I was in Asheville, West Jefferson, Tennessee, upstate New York. I'd never done anything like that before, but was able to see some of these. Rochester was a city that stuck out to me. I could tell because it reminded me of a smaller version of Cleveland. That city at one point was it was in its heyday, and it just wasn't anymore. It wasn't awful, but you could tell that was, it was the manufacturing opportunity, and you've had the hollowing out. And it made me think, I was in Saratoga too. There was another place where you could tell at one point there was a lot going on. Beautiful city. But it didn't take overnight. It took decades to get to this point. And this whole notion of, 20 trillion is coming back in the United States, not that that's a great thing, but you're not going to be able to do that in a week.
You're not be able to do it in a week. And I was in Asheville last summer. I went down and stayed at oh, what's the big resort up on the hill? I can't think of it. It's beautiful. Grove Park Inn. Beautiful. Resort's been there for 100 years, 120 years. And so we took a drive into downtown Asheville the one day. And first off, now Asheville is one of, if not the wealthiest city in North Carolina. It's very higher end. And it was right around the first of the month that we were there over the summer. And one of the things we noticed is this lengthy line out the door down the street at the food bank in Asheville, North Carolina, one of the wealthiest cities in the whole state. Interesting. Then we stop over by the Biltmore Village, right? So Biltmore State. We didn't go there this time. We were there, 4 years ago. We went there. But Biltmore Village was originally where the workers who built Biltmore lived while they were building this beautiful home around the turn of 1895 to 1900. And Biltmore Village had been turned into this beautiful outdoor shopping area. And it's, if you're an American, you've got a couple of these in every area, right? It's like now it's the new thing of like it's outdoor shopping, upscale, beautiful stores, restaurants, etc. So when we were here in 22, when we were there in 22, all these were open, very nice. We come back in 25, they're all closed, almost all of them still. And you can see the watermark where the flooding had occurred. There's this little river, I can't name the name, and you look at it, you're like, there's no way but this little thing in the floods, I guess that would have been in 24. So over a year earlier, right around a year earlier, this thing flooded, and so it was literally the water was over, like up onto the roofs, and you can still see the mud marks of the water. And nothing's been done. It's all boarded up, no rebuilding. And so we asked our server the next day. We're like, why is at the Grove Park Inn? Why there's beautiful shops and they're gone, and it's over a year and nothing's being done. And we're like, what's going on? They're like, well, the insurance companies are all banding together and saying that basically, unless you have like $1 million, I think they were charging $1 million for insurance, then they're not going to let you rebuild. I'm like, but that was like a 1 in a 200-year flood. They're like, the story around town is that they're banding together and charging an enormous, like a lump sum, enormous amount of money, or else the insurance company's not going to write you a policy, and the contractors won't rebuild without a policy. And they're not going to. And so here we are a year later, nothing's rebuilt. And I then tie that into your point of like, hey, we have 20 trillion coming back. We all this like Palisades fire in California, as I understand. Not a lot's been done. A year after this flooding, nothing's been done. And there's a great quote by Jeff Bezos, right, who says, the former CEO of Amazon, he says, I have found that when the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. There's usually something wrong with how you're measuring it. And so when you have the anecdotes around, it's over a year and nothing's been done in Asheville, and there's food lines, food stamp lines in Asheville. In Asheville, I mean, Asheville's high end in North Carolina, downtown. When it takes over a year and not a lot's done, according to a number of different people on X in the Palisades. These types of anecdotes, there's information there relative to these broad pronouncements of what we're going to do. Even if you go to success stories, Elon just opened up a lithium factory in Texas. It took him 3 years. Now, this is Elon. Like, nobody works faster than Elon. Nobody. Like, that guy's unbelievable. His ability to bring focus, his ability to basically find little cracks and just jump on them until they give. And it took him 3 years. And it's, in the grand scheme of things, not that big a lithium plant. And then you hear these pronouncements, well, we're going to bring back all this money and we're going to reshore and we're going to do it in 18 to 24 months. And on the one hand, I've got my anecdotes all telling me they're high, that ain't going to happen. And then I have sort of like everybody who's taking everything that, and it's funny, right? Because one side believes whatever their side says verbatim, and the other side will refuse it no matter what, and vice versa. So like if you're blue and the blue guy says this, you believe it like it was, the good Lord himself said it, and vice versa if you're red. And just as the opposite, right? It's like the devil if you're blue and a red says it, and it's the devil. Despite the fact that I've got 30 years of evidence that all they do is lie. Like if I could short what they say, you're going to make money shorting what they say 8 out of 10 times. And then I have my anecdotes going, there's no way we're going to do this fast enough. There's no way this is going to happen in the time frame they're saying. There's no way it's going to happen without being very inflationary. I think you're right. Like there's this gap, there's this credibility gap. There's this of like, how they going to do it? And I just keep saying, we're going to reshore, but take the over on how long it's going to take, and take the over on how inflationary it's going to be.
Well, and how much? Well, because the political landscape could change between now and then in the as they're trying to onshore this. And I was I was in Asheville right around the same time you were, and it might have been the river that I ran on. There was a bike path. I don't remember what it was called, but part of the bike path got knocked out by the hurricane. It was unbelievable. Luke, I'm talking to this guy. I'm like real social when I'm in these like new towns or whatever. And I started talking to this guy and I said, if the hurricane would have, and we were probably 10 feet above the water from the river, the part of the path was higher. I said, if we were standing here when the hurricane would have come through, what would have happened? He goes, we would have died. We would have drowned. And these buildings were on the other side. They looked like they were artist buildings. The guy told me where artists would rent out space. Glass was gone. Buildings just sitting there. 2 or 3 of them, just brick buildings, empty, abandoned, nothing.
Nothing. And there's something about a society that it reminds me of like when I used to go on vacation to like Mexico or Jamaica. We went on our honeymoon in Jamaica. And then, in 2000, my wife and I went to Mexico on a vacation, right? And you would see like these buildings that were half built and then just left. And this is back in like 1999 America, 2000 America. You go there like, wow, like that's a strange concept to me. Like in these third world countries, they start something and then like they run out of funding or whatever happens and they just leave it until they have enough money. And fast forward 25 years, it happens slowly. But here we are in the United States of America in some very well-to-do communities. And something happens, and a year later, nothing. They've done nothing. It's like Mexico in 2000, or it's like Jamaica in 1999. I'm like, what is going on here? And then you layer in like, hey, we need we need to do this for, Empire America, I can see why there's a level of frustration.
Well, and I had the reminder of that when I moved to Phoenix in '06 because when the '08 crash happened, there were freeway ramps that were started that were never finished, and they just sat here. And this is what I try to explain to people, from where we're from in Northeast Ohio, because they haven't experienced that. And that's where, I want to talk about data centers and AI, but as we're talking about this, the real estate boom that, is happening all across the country right now, but it seems to be cooling off. In Phoenix, Vegas, California, other markets got crushed, right, in '08. Ohio didn't feel that as much. I think there was a little bit of a decline, but not to the point where you were losing, 50%, 70% of the appraisal value. Do you see something like that occurring, like say in your area with real estate?
Not really. No, I mean, it's a, we have a good friend who's a real estate agent, and her husband's a higher end landscape contractor. And the last time we were out with them, he goes, "Look, around here, what I'm seeing, you're either rich or you're poor. There's no longer anything in between. And if you're rich, just get the job done. What's it cost? 20% more? Great. Just get it done." And those are, there's a lot of those in part because it's the boomers, right? The boomers are 70 years old. They've got 65, 70% of the assets in this country. So that's $50 trillion. And they've got a hard stop at death, right? They want a new patio. Money's no object. And then the other thing where that's playing out is with a real estate agent was like sort of entry level homes, you can't find them. Like they are just, so it is the entry level sort of, Berea, those little post-war bungalows in Berea, right? One bath, two beds, one floor. Those go for $250,000 now.
That's insane to me,
Cash,
Luke. That's insane to me.
cash,
Brook Park is like that too.
cash. Yeah. And, we've got some houses coming up here, national builders. They're nice homes. I don't want anything. They're nice, beautiful starter homes. And they start from like 450 to 500. And, some people are probably listening to this in certain parts of the country go, "Oh my God, as if I wish," right? But like in Cleveland, like, whoa. So we are a lagging indicator on real estate. We are seeing, the market is still relatively firm, but it's sort of this weird market of you either have money or you don't.
And that's the K-shaped economy, right? And that's where I, it's, what is going to be the breaking point of all this? And it makes me wonder, because like to your point, boomers, as they continue to get older and they die off, the young people can't afford to buy these. And also, you're factoring in insurance, taxes, living. You can't do it.
Yeah, it's tricky. It is, I think there's a lot of, and not even I'll think, I'm told there's a lot of, hey, boomer parents or boomer grandparents, are either making the first down payment or buying the house and then, in cash and having the younger generation rent from them. But if you don't have a boomer grandparent with that kind of money or a parent with that kind of money, it's hard. It is big chunks of income. And then, yeah, you layer in these other costs that go up with the cost of the real estate. And it's tricky. It's hard to make the math work.
Well, also like in terms of real estate, I mean, Northeast Ohio, I know I was going to save it to the end, but since we're talking about it, I am like the biggest I hate this idea of the stadium that they're building in Brook Park. And they're building some megaplex, I guess, in downtown Cleveland as well. Some jumbotrons and
is that right? I have not
entertainment
even paid
district.
attention to that. Okay.
I don't forget what it's called, but here you are, all these things that we're talking about, infrastructure cities, and yeah, you're going to allocate money to a stadium, and they're going to have that outdoor shopping that's going to have the cheesecake factory, all this stuff, right? They have all these outdoor malls that they were cool 20 years ago because they were new, but now they all have the same. I don't care if you're in Scottsdale or Cleveland or wherever. They have the Apple Store, Athleta, Lululemon, Cheesecake Factory, you know. But so they're allocating taxpayer money for this new project. Makes no sense to me, Luke.
Well, it is fundamentally distasteful to me to fund an entertainment project with taxpayer money when there are so many higher and better uses of that money, in my opinion. Um, and when the owner's a billionaire, it's basically a subsidy of a billionaire, especially when the team has not been very good. And forget about the team not being very good, but you know, I'm a Cleveland guy. I've been my whole life, so you have lots of relationships. Like when you have a team who does the due diligence on Deshaun Watson, gets the background, knows the risks, and still signs away the franchise for Deshaun Watson, as I hear happened, and then they want taxpayer money to build a stadium to support poor decision. It's like a metaphor for a lot of other things going on in this country, which is, yes, I know we've done things galactically badly in the past, but trust us on this one. Give us more tax dollars. And it's just very, I would rather see the money spent elsewhere in better, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's your job training, whether it's, look, let's give scholarships to, 1,000 skilled trades, because that's going to create demand for housing. It's going to create, something much more than, a new stadium. But, I'm one guy, so who knows? My
Well,
opinion doesn't really matter.
well, and I think the funny part about it is too is it's going to be a dome. What does this football team need to worry about a dome? They don't play in January, so what is that needed for? Right?
Ouch.
I mean, I saw that. I just laughed, and everybody I've told that to, they're like, "Yeah, it's so true. I never even thought of it." I'm like, "Yeah, they're and that is a summary, I think, of this country where these billionaires, they don't care. They just don't care because they're not going to have to pay for it. They'll figure out a way that it's not going to cost them any money for this project."
Yeah, I just wish there was more skin in the game, right? For as much as we hear everyone, I'm a big skin in the game guy. If you got skin in the game, great, But if it's a project where there's not skin in the game, it's just fundamentally, I just don't agree with it.
Brings me to my next point in regards to data centers that they're building all over the country. Which that's another thing. Why they would ever put those in Arizona, Nevada, because of the amount of water that these things require, it makes zero sense. But it's but same thing with these data. They're popping up everywhere, and that's the idea of. Was that what the reshoring is they're relying on data centers and AI?
I the we are recognizing as a country that we spent our money on the wrong things over the last 25 years. While we were, people say, well, China subsidizes their manufacturing. Sure, they do, heavily. America subsidizes stuff too. I can list $8 to $10 trillion of American subsidies right now. People say, what? But we spent $8 to $10 trillion in wars in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. What if we just spent that $8 to $10 trillion on our grid, our infrastructure, like the Chinese did, by the way, our manufacturing? They just look, their subsidy guys were smarter and more strategic than ours were. Full stop. And so when you tie that to the AI question, now we're behind the eight ball, and you're seeing these the data centers go up. Okay. The electrical grid isn't there. It's straining, it's driving costs up. And look, I understand why they're doing it. I also can see clear to it being a political issue soon. It's already arguably started to be a political issue. There was I forget which office in Georgia. There was a special election back in November, and it had been Republican seats for 20 plus years. And they went they went blue, running on a platform of your electricity costs are going up because of these data centers, and we're going to stop this. Um, there's, I don't know, there's no easy political questions to it, right? On one hand, it makes sense. Trump came out last week, 2 weeks ago, said we're going to have a special auction in the PJM electrical grid. And the special auction is going to be tech companies that have to bid for future electricity from plants to be built as a means of funding these plants. And you can see it break into two political views of that. One view is this makes sense. You're using it. You're going to be bidding up the electricity. You should pay for it. The other side is this is a windfall profits tax hidden as or disguised as, basically windfall profit tax on tech, on AI, to the extent there are some profits there, which only some of the players have them, right? From other parts of their business, not necessarily the AI business. And I think there's merit to both arguments. This is where this is always so tricky is it ties back to the stadium point. If you're using the electricity, you should pay it. You should pay for some of the setup. It shouldn't just be a public and then you get to keep all the profits. It's the sort of, we've gotten to this point by some version repeatedly of, socialization of the losses and privatization of the profits, right? That was 2008 was socialization of the losses, privatization of the profits. The Iraq War, socialization of the losses, privatization of the profits. And so, to his credit, I think he is in oftentimes very politically astute, Trump, and I think that that's a politically winning strategy. But again, it ties back that what can you do? How fast can you do it? There's an order of operations that's still being ignored.
Yeah, I think about the movie The Big Short when Steve Carell was towards the end. He's on the he's speaking, and right before they get the notification that Bear Stearns was crashing, and he said, and I'm getting the quote wrong, but ordinary people are going to have to pay for this. And that's what I feel like it's the way it always works with everything. Like ordinary people have to pay for this. Privatization of the profits, public for the losses, right? Or the investment.
And that is ultimately the challenge that we're facing, right? When it goes back to the first point we were talking about around, the healthcare CEO, et cetera, is when Gutenberg's printing press came out, right, it democratized information. Up to that point, the church had a monopoly on information. And in the same way, the internet has democratized information. Social media has democratized information. And the government and the media and sort of what some call an oligarchy, in the West, they've lost their monopoly on information. And so everyone can kind of see this repeated, everyone says we're capitalist until there's a crisis. And then, then the wealthy and well-connected get bailed out, which is not capitalism. And I'm not saying you just let everything crash to the ground, but there's a very defined, capital structure rules in capitalism. The equities get wiped out. The bondholders get converted into equity, become the new holders of the company. The management that drove you into the ditch gets fired. If they committed fraud, they go to jail. Like that's like 101 capitalism 101. And we haven't followed that in a very long time. And geopolitically, Nicholas Nassim Taleb gave a presentation one time where he said, look, in the old days, like the generals led people into war. And so if you had a bad strategy, you died. And so you didn't get a second chance to lead people into another losing initiative. And in our society, we have the same politicians and the same groups and the same generals, and the same think tanks leading us into losing wars over and over and over and over. Why? Because they don't get killed from their own stupid decisions, their own bad decisions. And the challenge of the internet and social media is that anyone with half a curiosity and a half an hour of spare time starts to become very obvious that that's what's happening here, exactly what's happening here. And then you get the reaction of, well, Hillary the other day. Hey, we need to control the, we need to censor social media to make sure, that we can keep ruling. And it's like, or you could just rule better. Or so, it's these are sort of philosophical topics on some level. Um, but it's the underlying frustration I think that that people are expressing is this socialism for the wealthy and well connected and capitalism for the poor is not a sustainable system. It's not a politically sustainable system. And that symptom of that is the polarization and the increasing tit for tat violence that we're seeing.
What would you describe the United States then now, if no longer capitalist?
I would call it I don't know, a social democratic oligarchy or something like that. I don't know. Like it's its own animal in the same way that China's its own animal, right? Like America's capitalist like Chinese communist, which is like kind of not. Yeah, there's capitalist aspects to it. Um, there's a very socialist aspects to America. There's very, oligarchical aspects to America. And there's in China, there's very communist in some ways, very capitalist in others, right? It's like people are like, well, China's communist. And the same person will in the next breath tell you, well, China is so competitive that their companies don't make any money. You're like, wait, back up. Like if we had a really good fourth estate in this country, if we had really bulldog media, they would go, wait, Mr. President, Mr. Senator, you just said that China's communist. Yes, I did. Then you just said that China's competing away all the profits in there, which is a trait that only happens in distinctly capitalist and competitive countries. Can you please, for me and for your audience, resolve the fundamental dissonance between your statement that China is communist and your statement that China is hyper competitive? Those two things can't be true. Which one is true, Mr. President? Which one is true, Mr. Senator? And you know what they would do? And then that media person would never be invited back to the presser. Like I don't know. It's a very different, in the same way. Are we capitalists? No, because capitalists don't bail out anything, right? Capitalism would have been fire the bank managements, take the bank equity to zero, make the bondholders the new holders. Anyone engaged in fraud went to jail. Look, if you engaged in fraud, mortgage fraud in this country, you go to jail. And maybe most importantly, fundamentally, if you are not settling trade, people say we have free trade. That's not free trade if you're settling in the bonds of your country. That's not free trade. That's central planning. You have to settle free trade in a neutral reserve asset, like a gold, like a Bitcoin. If you don't do that, it's not free trade. It's simply central planning by another name. So that's why I say, like, are we capitalists? Like, parts, but we're not a capitalist society. No.
Well, and I've gotten pushback when I've asked people, and people reach out saying they don't like the answer in regards to China, but and I've never been there, so I can't say from experience of seeing it with my own eyes. But the people that I've spoken with, and people push back, well, they're being controlled, so they're going to say what they're going to say. I'm like, I don't know. I see some of these videos, and they look like pretty nice cities to me. And I met somebody that I was talking to at a coffee house. Woman, her kids were early 20s, and they were there. The son was there. He's like, it was great. Oh, actually, the son and the daughter were there. And I said to the daughter, she was probably 19 or 20. And I said, did you feel uneasy being in the city? She said, no, not at all. Not at all. I didn't feel unsafe. She's like, it was beautiful. The infrastructure, I think they were in Shanghai or Singapore. And, seems like they do things better. And I know they say they're communists, but are they?
There's certainly authoritarian. There's central, the central sort of planning, but they course adjust a lot. Um, I have a friend who's an American who's been there for 30 years, and he said perhaps the best way to define China is that it is a 5,000-year-old culture with a country attached to it. And so there's this sort of fundamental contradiction of this Communist Party central planning with sort of this 2,000-year history of very good infrastructure building as a culture, engineering, very highly qualified leadership, right? And a Confucian values system overlaid that just makes this is not the USSR. This is a very different animal, and hyper competitive. Like he said, he goes like, listen, are we communist? Yes. And it is way more capitalist than the US. Like in America, you've got to register like this and that and that. And if you fail, they'll give you this safety net. And then in China, they're like, oh, you want to row across the lake? Okay, here's a paddle. Good luck. Hope you don't drown. And if you drown, they're just like, oh, sorry you drowned. Like, which is way more capitalist than, I mean, almost libertarian relative to what we have here. And that's to say it's so easy to put black and white labels on anything. And I think it's very dangerous and I think it's misleading.
Well, and also too, like for somebody like yourself, could you be successful in a country like China, living and working, and make a nice living for yourself and get ahead? I believe you could.
I think there are things I couldn't say. I couldn't criticize the government, full stop. And my understanding, there's like a 3-strike rule around criticizing the government, right? So you'd get sort of, strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, and you don't want to get to strike 3. And so that's very different. But in terms of talking about business and things, I know people that have done that portion of what I do for a long period of time. And I don't really spend a lot of time. Well, in America, I spend a lot of time discussing government policies because it's so dominant in what we do these days, which is another sign, by the way, we're not in some sort of pure capitalist society. The fact that all we do is talk about the Fed and Trump and Biden and what the government's doing. The softer side of that too is like here in America, there are things that I cannot say here, and they're not going to disappear me. But I could spend 10 seconds here, and I could get your website. You and I both know I could get your podcast and my appearances blacklisted across every algorithm out there, and we wouldn't get disappeared, but we would get canceled in some way, shape, or form if we said the wrong things. And I'm not going to elaborate on that. It's less draconian, but it's directionally not that different. So the deal in America is you can criticize the government, but you can't criticize certain interests. And in China, you can criticize certain interests and you can't criticize the government, and with more draconian penalties. So, I've had, yeah, it's, again, it's more philosophical than it's wisdom is seeing things for what they are, not what they're called. I saw that quote and I thought and I think in this case, I think it describes it perfectly.
Well, and I think there's trade-offs too, right? Where, you look at a city, let's say, for example, Beijing or Singapore, the crime there, I would guess, is virtually, it was a lot less than, say, a New York or Chicago. But then people will say, well, you got surveillance. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not a government guy. I'm just trying to look at this objectively. You want to live in a safer place? Yes, there's going to be cameras everywhere. Or
that's I've had, and that's the trade-off, right? Is there are protests in China. The deal is like, it's kind of like the deal we all have with Apple. Apple tracks everything we do. It's a little iPhone, tell everywhere we've been. It all goes somewhere. I'm sure the U.S. government's tracking it. Hi, guys. But that phone works. And so we don't care. it's kind of the same deal. I have a friend of mine. I was at dinner, and he and his wife. This is about a year ago. He and his wife. They've been everywhere. They have traveled everywhere. She's traveled everywhere, and she said, and beautiful woman, really stunning, and said the only place I feel safe to get dressed up to the nines and go out was China, Beijing, Shanghai, Singapore, Dubai. I said, how about London? She's like, oh God, when I go out in London, I get dressed up like a homeless person. I don't wear any of my jewelry, nothing. I'll get robbed instantly. I don't put my phone out. How about it here in the US? No, not in the US. I don't feel safe. Paris? Not even Paris? Oh, Paris? No way. I was in Italy last year. I could see how they could feel that way. It's a little, I'm a bigger guy. I don't, but I still was, I was still wearing, and maybe the most incredible story they told me was we lost our phone in Beijing. Can you imagine being in Beijing visiting and losing your phone? Oh my God. The authorities had it back to them in 2 hours. Can you imagine losing your phone in America? You think you'd ever see it again? You'd be like calling frantically to have like any person. They had it back in 2 hours. Now, is it possible they had all the data on it? Sure. It probably had it the second they stepped foot in the country. Um, so I don't know. Anytime someone is like screaming at me really loudly about one thing in particular, it sets off a spidey sense of me, right? So like when I'm sitting here getting on heavy repeat, you know, China, Russia bad 24/7 in America, I am just a disagreeable person. I immediately start going, all right, how I start checking for my wallet. Someone's about to screw me somehow. Because look, I remember 2020 there, 2021, they were shouting at me 24/7 about something.
You know what runs through my head when you get to this blue red stuff, and I've been saying it on every episode, but I can't help it because it's like a reoccurring theme. This is not a superhero movie, and we are not in the fourth quarter of a football game. This is not a superhero movie.
No, this is about fixing. And I think some of this Fed Trump stuff is a perfect example um, of it. But yeah, when you say we're not in the fourth quarter of a full football game, right? So you're hearing, oh, the Chinese cheated or the Russians didn't go by this. And wait, let me ask this question. The Bills played the Broncos last weekend, right? The Denver Broncos. We all saw that game, right? We all saw the refs had a pretty big say in that game. Let me ask you this. Have you heard any Denver fans complaining about those calls? No. Why would they? Because the Denver side won. So when you're hearing, I was here as the job in Rust Belt where jobs were getting offshored. And the attitude from Washington and Wall Street was, shut up, pleb. This is good for America. There'll be more jobs and learn to code and whatever, right? And now those same people, not the same exact people, but the same constituencies, they're all kind of the same. And now they sound like the working class sounded like here in the Rust Belt of America 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it's like learn to weld now. And my point here is like in 2003, when the working class of America was squawking about the rules, they were like the Bills fans. They were losing. And here, what can we glean from this? Who's squawking? Is China squawking about the rules? Not really. Are the Russians squawking about the rules? Not really. Who's squawking? The Americans, the Brits, the Europeans. The Japanese aren't squawking. The Japanese are like, they do what they do, right? They do great work. They work their butt. Like, So I don't know. In my experience, to carry the sports metaphor for, if you're squawking about the rules, if you're squawking about the refs, you ain't squawk. We weren't squawking about the rules in 2004. We're squawking about the rules in 2008, 2010, 2014. Why are we squawking about the rules? There are rules. There are rules, and we're squawking about them. You always, in my experience, I've played sports, I've watched sports my whole life. You know when you start squawking about the refs and the rules? When you're losing.
Well, and people were, to your point, squawking about, oh, China buying up farmland, doing this, doing that in the United States. It's like, okay, well, who allowed that to happen? Who?
It's our rules. Literally, the structure of the dollar's reserve status requires open capital accounts. All these people like, we're king dollar, king dollar, king dollar. Great, king dollar. The rules of king dollar means you have to have a wide open capital account to make that dollar exchangeable for whatever they want here. And they don't want our treasuries anymore. So they're going to buy farmland, copper mines, ports, semiconductor companies, gold, anything but treasuries. Well, we don't want them buying it. Great. Close a capital account. Guess what happens when you close a capital account? End of dollar reserve status, as it's been structured since 71. This is the choice. This is why they're squawking about the rules. This is because, and when I say losing, that's what I mean. They want this impossible, this is Triffin's dilemma manifested here, now. I've been using this metaphor from the Nicholas Sparks the Notebook, where the kid's like, what do you want? Like, I want China to stop buying farmland, and I also want to keep dollar reserve status. And what do you want? China's going to buy NVIDIA, and we want to keep reserves. What do you want? You want China to stop doing that, close the capital account, end dollar reserve status, shift it to gold, let gold run like a jackrabbit higher. I was going to say something else there, but I caught myself.
You can. You say whatever you want, Luke. I don't care.
And we side note, we once had a party here at a country club that was when we were invited guests. We had a little bit to drink. Anyway, they had it like the video. It was a Kentucky Derby party, right? So you're getting ready to watch it, but before the Kentucky Derby party, you had this taped race where you sponsor a horse and you watch the horse go, and so they show you which one's your horse and go, but you get to name the horse. And so we named our horse Run Mother Run, or Run Mother Effer Run. So this poor announcer at this staid country club, like we've had a bunch of drinks, and they're like, and up in first is Run Mother Effer Run, Run Effer Run. This poor old guy's having to say Run Mother Effer Run over and over. Anyway, that's what I was going to say. Let gold run like a mother effer higher. But back to the point. You have to make a decision. Like, these are our rules. They're using our rules. If you don't like the rules, we can change the rules. But that means the end of dollar reserve status in this case, as it's been structured since 71. You've got to go to a neutral reserve asset. Gold, which means $10,000, $20,000 gold, or Bitcoin, which means a huge number of Bitcoin, and a big number of gold, too, as a side note.
Well, and you mentioned as well that, so the United States is selling gold to indirectly making its way to China.
Yes.
Explain that to me like I'm 5, Luke. What are we doing here? China's the bad guy, I thought, right?
I am just like describing flows. And the flows are such that the U.S. trade deficit has shrunk meaningfully in the last couple of months, quarters. And historically, when the trade deficit shrinks, it's a sign of a recession, right? We have 2/3 consumer. You stop consuming, trade deficit goes down, recession. A big part of why the trade deficit has shrunk in the latest data, September, October, the last 2 months, is the U.S. exports of non-monetary gold have been more than 100% of U.S. exports. So of the growth in U.S. exports, right? So exports were up X. 105% of X was exports of non-monetary gold and precious metals. And when you look at the Swiss data, where did that gold go? It went to Switzerland, also to the UK to a lesser extent. And then you look at Switzerland's data. Where did Swiss exports of gold go in those months? They went to China, they went to the UK. So I can, I don't know why it's happening. I don't know the prices at which it's happening. I'm presuming market prices, but that's not necessarily has to be the case. And when it comes to gold, uh, in September and October, factually, the United States sent a lot of gold to Switzerland, who then sent gold on to China. Why is that happening? And to the UK, right? Why is it happening? I don't know. But de facto, that's the United States settling a part of its deficit in gold, its trade deficit in gold.
Let's play Clue here, Luke. Why do you think it's happening?
Why do I think it's happening? Um, I think either the Chinese have had it, and as a form of retaliation or squeezing the system, they're just going to empty out vaults in the West until the price of gold rises, um, or they get what they want, or we've already arrived at some sort of trade deal, and this is part of the deal, which is basically, hey, you know, yes, we will sell you rare earths again, but no more dollars for rare earths, only gold, which would be, a version of what we did to the Brits in 1940, right? The Brits were like, oh, help us. We need ships and stuff because we offshored our industrial base. Sorry, so stop me when this sounds familiar. And Americans said, yeah, we'll be happy to sell you stuff under Lend-Lease. But I know you're the reserve currency and you have been for 120 years, Britain, but we only want dollars or gold. No sterling. We don't want any of that paper. We just want dollars or sterling. So, to me, it's one of those two things. Either the Chinese are just buying any gold anywhere in the world they can, getting rid of dollars, or there's been some sort of deal around certain portions of trade that are settled in gold.
Well, I think that's the other thing that people, what a mess the United States, over the course of how many decades that they can't even, all war is bad, but they can't even go to war because they need the rare earth minerals from China in order to build weapons to use.
And the military's been warning about this for 15 years. It's something I've been highlighting for probably almost 10 years, which is there's a great quote from, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Michael Mullen. In 2011, he said, we're borrowing money from China to build weapons to face down China. This is not a sustainable threat, or it's not a sustainable strategy, excuse me. The military's been warning about it for 20 years. They've known. People say, well, they're so far behind. Well, I was told at a private conference 8 years ago that in 2007, there was a Sputnik moment with the U.S. defense and intelligence communities when the Chinese shot down one of their own satellites with another satellite. They didn't think the Chinese were anywhere near those types of capabilities. That was, again, 2007. That was 19 years ago. And so it wasn't like, oh, they snuck up on us what they've got, that they've been able. We've known, like, you're a pretty friggin' advanced country if you can use one of your satellites to shoot down another your satellite. And yet, the complacency, because we are worried about a financial crisis, we were still engaged with the nonsense that we got involved with in Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, right? Like these are in the long run the real costs of sort of this, supporting the American empire. You do things that are just fundamentally against your own interests more and more and more until they all pile up and it becomes too much to overcome. And I hope it's not too much to overcome, but with every passing month, the evidence continues to weigh towards it might be without some sort of real calamity around sort of a debt crisis or financial restructuring or political issue domestically or abroad. Um, you know, that's that's just how I see it.
How does the Japan carry trade factor into all this and your level of concern?
My level of concerns very high about the JGB market, and it's you've got a bunch of dry tinder around, and I think the JGB market could be the spark. Um, you've got a yen carry trade, which for the uninitiated, basically for a long time Japanese rates were basically zero. And so from call it 89 through, well, I think probably more like mid 90s, but for 20 plus years, Japanese rates were near zero. And a lot of people around the world borrowed in yen and then bought other assets for positive carry. Borrow at zero, buy another bond yielding 4, you make 4% risk free, other than the movement in the currency, which you can hedge out as a cost, right? So practically speaking, your carry's not 4, it's 3.25 or something, but risk free. And maybe you lever that up, right? Maybe you borrow 10 times against that. Especially if there are things like government bonds on either side, then you can lever that up a whole lot because that's safe collateral. So now in Japan, you have emerging market behavior in the bond market and the currency, where the currency is going down, which in the carry trade doesn't really hurt you. It actually probably helps you because you're borrowing. But the carry is going up, the yield, right? The interest on these obligations is going up. That kills you in a carry trade. And so what happens if it forces an unwind of said carry trade is the exact opposite of what we just said. You've got to buy Japan, sell everything else. Well, everything else is heavily American markets, to a lesser extent European and other markets, but it's heavily American markets, which means stocks go down, bonds go down, rates go up. And we're a heavily financialized economy. Our consumer spending marginally depends on stock prices going up and never going down, which means our government receipts are heavily dependent on stock prices only going up, never going down. And so if it unwinds, it has the potential to be the mother of all crises. So it's very concerning to me, the price action in the JGB market, Japanese government bond market, and yen market, certainly for several months now. But definitely the start to the year, very discouraging / unnerving.
Is that the top of your list right now of things that are like jumping out at you?
Yes, I think people are way too complacent about it.
What about the battle that seems to be brewing? I don't know if it's you don't know what to believe anymore with all this stuff, Luke. We are literally living. Maybe we are in a superhero movie. Maybe I should start believing that, and then you'll be able to deal with this a little bit better. But the fact that we have the Federal Reserve and the administration going at it between Powell and which I thought he was leaving in a few months, and yet,
yeah. I think I just think it's a symptom of the broader problem, right? Which is the fight between Powell and Trump, the Fed and Trump, was always inevitable. If you didn't want the fight between the Fed and the Treasury to happen, then we shouldn't have done the dumb stuff in Iraq, the dumb stuff in Afghanistan, the bailouts, the way the structure with Wall Street, the stimmies and the COVID, any of that stuff. But if you start down a path towards a destination, don't be surprised when you arrive there. We are now in a position, by virtue of all those dumb decisions, where we took on a lot of debt and really didn't get anything in terms of real payback. If we would have spent $10 trillion on infrastructure, there'd be a real payback, right? We spent a bunch of money on the Eisenhower highway system. There was a positive payback. Great. That's good debt to take on. We took on dumb debt. There was no payback. There was probably negative payback. And so now we have two choices. We can let the Fed stay independent, but that means when the Fed hikes rates, they're either going to put the U.S. in a debt crisis or a deflationary depression, as the U.S. government has to reduce spending on defense and entitlements to make room for the interest because we've let the debt get so high. And so in that world, that option number one is not only is the Fed independent, the Fed is actually making the domestic and foreign economic decisions for this country and the foreign policy decisions for this country. Because when the Fed hikes rates, defense budget has to shrink. Foreign aid has to shrink to make room for interest. Conversely, the other choice is what Trump, et cetera, want, which is forget it. We're a sovereign government. The Fed does not make our decisions for us. They are not an elected body. They are a private group. Okay, we are going to take control of them for some time. We're going to inflate this debt away. And that's the other choice. So either the government is subservient to the Fed or the Fed is subservient to the government, but there is no world where something in between is an option anymore because of all the dumb things we did with borrowed money over the last 20 years. And this has happened over and over in history, and it's always resolved kind of the same way, which is government takes over the Fed, Government takes over the central bank, and it's very inflationary. And I think that's a message of gold. I think that's why gold, goes up every day, ending in Y in the last, year, basically. I think it's hit 200 new highs in the last year. Well, option A is really good for gold because it implies basically an economic depression or a debt crisis. Good for gold, good for gold. Or money printing, good for gold. It's all good for gold. Beautiful.
And it symbolizes there's no trust in the system anymore. That's what Ed Dow had said when I had him on a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and there's, we wrote for clients, we highlighted a Pew Research study showing faith in the US government is down to below 20%. And critically, it's been that way since roughly 2010. So we've gone Democrat, Republican, and there's been no bounce. It's like if there was no dead cat bounce. It just like dropped it off a building, flat at below 20%. And by way of context, Eisenhower, Kennedy, LBJ, those numbers were between 75 and 82% in terms of faith in the government. And so it's fascinating to me because you hear it ties back to the point about the unity of the country and our ability to do things quickly. Well, we're just going to do this fast. We're going to reshore. A country where only 19% of the people have faith in the institutions does not operate at the same pace and in the same manner as a unified country with 80% faith in its government institutions. And they did this to themselves. They lied about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. They did. I understand we had to go in Afghanistan. I had a dinner with somebody. They said, listen, there were a bunch of Taliban shortly after 9/11. We flew the B-52s over. We killed tens of thousands of them. We could have made a deal about that, a big deal about it. Hey, here's what you do. Here's what you get if you do what you just did. And then move on. The whole Iraq thing, the lie, even people with integrity, Colin Powell, selling out his integrity in those testimonies. In the short run, they think these things don't matter, but that's how you go from 80% faith in the government to 19% over time. The way they handled 08, more chipping away. The way they discussed Syria, the way they handled COVID was just the coup de grace, or just the absolute coup de grace of faith in the government. Especially the more that comes out around that, right? Like it came out last week that they've got the internal documents where Fauci's like, yeah, technically, or no, it's Paul Offit, saying, hey, yeah, we kind of knew that everybody didn't need it, but it was like, we need to make the messaging good. And so like, what? Like now, if you were paying attention, you could kind of infer those kinds of things, but now they're coming out and admitting it, which on one level is good. But on the other hand, that 18% faith in government, after he got done talking, it was down to 16% faith in government. And we've seen these things before. I'm watching the Netflix series on the Vietnam War that's out. It's a really good documentary on it. And they knew in 67 they couldn't win the war. 67, early 67. And they lied. And I'm watching this and I'm rowing on the concept too. And I'm going, there's nothing new under the sun. It's the same stuff. Except they were at 60% faith in government on their way to like 40, and then it bounced in the 80s back up to 60. Our lives are taking place at 20% faith in government and going lower.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't know how those institutions are restored at this point because of that. I don't know how you do that.
There needs to be inquiries, and there needs to be open testimony, right? Like in my opinion, you can never say there's no hope, right? Because you look at Rwanda, and they have had panels in what happened in Rwanda 30 years ago. And that culture was able on some level to have inquiries, open commissions, and begin a process of healing. We're not even in the vicinity of having a conversation. So yeah, I tend to agree with you, which is just, yeah, that's, I don't, if it was a stock chart, right? If it was a stock, faith in U.S. government has been a short since JFK. If at 80, It's down to 20, down to 18. Would you buy it here or sell it here? I would short it here. I would still short it here. It's going lower.
Well, and also too is yeah, in relation to because you can gamble on everything now, right? Like everything there's it's so easy to
Which is
gamble.
another sign of like, yeah, don't even get like I'm the father of three sons, and it angers me to no end how much they are preying on young men, getting them addicted to gambling with all these ads and yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
You can gamble on political. I mean, you probably could gamble on our hometown's mayor race. I'm at. I mean, I've never been on one of those sites, but you can gamble on political outcomes all over the world.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's interesting, and it's there's a term for it. I actually think Dimitri Kofinas, I think, coined the term financial nihilism. And this is also where I've read enough of the history books, enough to be dangerous. You want to know what else there was financial nihilism, low faith in government, huge political disparity, and bubbling stock markets and record wealth inequality as a country that had just lost a war? Weimar Germany in the 20s. Oh, by the way, they've been deindustrialized and uh, trade deals, armistice that they didn't feel were fair. And they had enormous war reparations that were inflation adjusting. You know who else has enormous inflation adjusting reparations? We owe the baby boom generation inflation adjusting reparations, right? Social Security goes up with inflation. We don't owe them 60 trillion in Medicare. We owe them 60 trillion in hips and knees, doctors' time, pharmaceuticals. The more you inflate, the more those go up. So there's this gambling phenomenon, I think, is a sign of this financial nihilism of the K-shaped economy, right? If you're on the bottom of the K, you can't get ahead. Live for today. Why save? Why not like why not gamble? The system's rigged against you anyway, and it's always, of course, its own flavor of sort of the human response to a set of conditions that rhyme with other conditions in history. But to me, it's so obvious. It's this financial nihilism is what's driving it, is as a fundamental commentary on the underlying frustration of the sort of bottom leg of the K.
Well, and you've got also with the younger people, they're swinging for the fences, right? Looking for that grand slam or that Hail Mary. And that's why I think it's how many young people, when I get a chance to speak with them, they all love Bitcoin, Luke. They love it.
And I think in the long run, Bitcoin, like I've told my boys, like, don't gamble, buy Bitcoin. Now, at the current present time, I don't think Bitcoin's a good place to be. Just tactically, I think it's likely to continue to have some downside. Um, but I think the structure of Bitcoin is a wonderfully potentially revolutionary technology around monetary energy reserve asset. Uh, I would pair it with gold. Like for me, I'm a Bitcoin and gold guy. Tactically, I don't like Bitcoin right now. I like gold. I always like gold by and large. There's a price at which I'll sell gold for U.S. Treasury bonds. It's just probably more like $20,000 or $30,000 an ounce. But I'll be happy to sell for those prices and put the money in Treasury bonds, all else equal, and clip my coupons for the rest of my days.
Do you see it going that high?
Uh, yeah, the I think it could, and the reason I think that is if you look at the foreign held portion of U.S. Treasury bonds, going back historically relative to the market value of U.S. official gold, that ratio was never less than 20%, right? Our foreign held debt was never less than 20% collateralized by our official gold at market prices. 1980 was 130%. Today, after the big run, it's up to 14%. A year ago it was 6-7%. So it could rise another. Now the long term average is 40%. So it would have to rise almost another 3x just to get to the long term averages. So that gets you to 15 right there. And if there's actually 60%, spent a lot of time there. So that's 5x from here. That gets you to 20. And if you actually ever have a real honest to goodness dollar crisis, which is not my base case, but everything that's happened in the last month makes an honest to goodness dollar crisis more likely, not less. Uh, that's another 10x from here. That'd be $45,000 goal, assuming no increase in debt, foreign held debt, and you know. So it's not a base case. I do think gold's going to 10 to 15,000. I think uh, that's probably I think a pretty safe range. I shouldn't say that. That's my base case that it goes to 10 to 15, and it's not safe, but it's 10 to that's my base case.
And silver?
Uh, I ultimately think the gold silver ratio goes higher, but I think silver goes higher. I full disclosure, I've been dead wrong. I was right on the gold to silver ratio going up to near 100, and I've been dead wrong since. Um, I ultimately think the gold to silver ratio would probably be, probably stays between 50 and 100. So, from here, you know, probably, dollar for dollar, every dollar gold goes up, silver probably goes up 75 cents, something like that, if I'm right. And if I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, I would get my guess is I'm more likely to be wrong in that silver goes up as fast as gold does.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing with all this, it's like you have people that are just it's absolutely going to do this, absolutely going to, whether it's metals, money, politics. Trump's just Captain America, he's a superhero, and Elon, they're the Avengers, and Tulsi Gabbard, and I can't get that out of my head, Luke. I'm going to get a coffee mug that says this is not a superhero movie. You want one? If I get it made, I'll send you one.
Send one here. Absolutely.
But Bitcoin, and I'm not a Bitcoin expert, and I'm sure I'm going to get some heat for this. If the government wants it to succeed, it's going to succeed. If they don't want it to succeed, it won't work. That's what I think about when I think of Bitcoin. And I also think about the Napster analogy. How when Napster came out, you could share music, everything was free, right? Napster and LimeWire, then all of a sudden, it got co-opted. I'm sorry for people that have to keep hearing me use this analogy, but I want Luke to hear it. Maybe see if he agrees or disagrees. That's what I feel about Bitcoin. If they want to take it over or co-opt it, I feel like they can do it.
I think in the short run they can make it very difficult. But when you really look at the technology, like the Iranians can't stop it, the Taliban hasn't been able to stop it, Chinese haven't been able to stop it. Um, and so ultimately it is unstoppable as a technology. Now that doesn't necessarily mean number go up forever because of that, right? They can make it very, very difficult, but it is very much a technology. Like I've been at conferences where and the Human Freedom Human why am I having Alex Gladstein's organization, HRF, Human Foundation, Human Freedom, Human. Um, I've been able to meet numerous very powerful stories of women in Afghanistan who were able to escape the Taliban because of Bitcoin. Like literally, they couldn't stop it. They take away their money, they take away their freedom, they take away bank accounts, take everything, and yet Bitcoin could still so now. But that is a not efficient economy, right? That is they can make it very, very difficult on you, but they can't stop it. And I think Putin said something similar. Like basically, you really can't stop Bitcoin, which raises some interesting points, right? Because if you're Putin, that could be a financial nuclear weapon. All he has to do is come out one day and be like, we're going to deploy 10% of our reserves of oil surpluses generated by oil sales into Bitcoin, alongside of what we do with gold. They started putting money into gold. Gold's gone from 6 barrels of oil per ounce. It's up to 80 barrels per ounce, right? So in 15 years, it's up 15x, 10x, or 12x. What would it be if we started buying Bitcoin with oil? Right now it's, so I think Bitcoin is a really amazing technology for freedom. And in the short run, I don't think that invalidates your point that there are things they can do and may do to mess with them. I mean, look, Google Operation Choke Point under Biden, right? They were actively trying to choke it out, and it weighed on the price. There's absolutely things they can do to mess with it in the short run, but in the long run, I think it's ultimately extremely powerful if you are willing to go the distance, right? If you are willing to be inconvenienced, they can't stop it. Um, but if you don't want to be inconvenienced, there's a lot of things they can do to just make it so inconvenient as to make it not worth your time.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time here with you, but I was, and hopefully I could connect with North Star Charts and have him on. But he was saying reference to oil going to 250 a barrel is what I was reading. Did you see that? Did you see
I
that?
did see it. Yep.
Yeah. But you bring up the story with Bitcoin and how that could drive up the price if Putin were to decide, in relation to oil, how that could drive the price up. It's just yeah, a lot of moving parts going on right now, Luke.
There are. There are. It is. Look, if anybody tells you they know for sure what's about to happen or is going to happen, run the other way. And that includes me. Like if someone's listening to me, like, boy, he's got to figure it out. No, I don't. Like I can see various moving parts. I can tell you which range of outcomes I think is likely for each of those moving parts. I can even tell you how I think certain of those moving parts and ranges of outcomes might interact with each other. But when you start layering them on top of each other it's like, we are at the end of a 100-year debt cycle, at the end of a 60-year monetary system, at the end of a fourth turning, at the end of a unipolar power moment, um, at the end of this creation of massive financial derivatives, uh, at the end of a period, arguably, of globalization 2.0 at some level. And these are just massive, massive societal factors that nobody knows how it's all going to play out. And that leads to a range of outcomes. Like I could sit down and you say, Luke, paint me the happiest picture of this, paint me the most unhappy picture of this. And the Overton window of those range of outcomes is as wise as it's been in my lifetime, in my opinion. Uh, and that includes a Cold War, right? Like, when we were faced with the threat of sort of nuclear extinction, like I think we're faced with that again at one of the tails. And so, it's one of these things of you just paying attention, building community, being conservative in your financial positioning. Don't take on debt for anything that's unproductive. And when I say unproductive, you don't borrow money to buy a farmland that you're going to be able to make a return, or some piece of property where you're going to make an acceptable rate of return above your cost of funding, by all means. But now is not the time in the long cycle to be borrowing a bunch of money on some, consumer joyride thing, in my opinion. So, that's where we are, in my opinion.
Well, I'll close with this. I mean, the World Economic Forum is going on right now, and one of the things that in Davos, I had said after the election, because I think people are saying, oh, we're going to get out of the WEF and sovereignty and look, and I hope I'm wrong about all this, right? I mean, I'm more wrong than I am right. So what do I know? The only one listening to me is you right now, Luke. So, but the people, the tech people, the financial instruments that they've built, and they're going to continue to build. They're all there. So I think we're going from one system to another, and that's going to include WEF 2.0, whoever's in that group. And this whole idea of the elites getting, left in the cold, there's elites all over the place.
My wife and I were talking the other day, and I think it's Ben Franklin who said it, but the quote is, he who would trade liberty for safety deserves neither, or will have neither. I don't remember the exact quote, but I think it's so apropos for where we are here today, which is don't trade liberty for safety, because there is no safety. there's this, one of the blessings and paradoxes of our modern world is that there's this view if we that there's safety. And there's safety from for most of us, thank God, from a lot of the sort of day-to-day things that used to, you know, infections or robbers on the way home from church or, from a restaurant and highwaymen and all these we've made so many advances. And so it gives you the illusion of safety, but like there's tomorrow's not guaranteed in anything you do. And so this sort of safety is a mirage. And so you shouldn't trade your liberty for that mirage of safety. If the safety that's there it's a mirage. It shouldn't be a condition to trading your liberty. The safety that we do have, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And when you see things like central bank digital currency, like that's what I'm really speaking to when I say this. And this some of this, World Economic Forum and some of these, UK for a while was talking about digital ID and some of these kind of things. Like these are bad ideas. These are, these are the same groups of people that 20 years ago, 25 years ago were saying it's going to be great. We're going to send our industry to China and we will be able to become a service economy. And the air will be a lot cleaner and costs will be lower, so it'll be good for the consumer. And don't worry about the people that are displaced because they'll find new jobs at higher wages. And when you look at those discussions, you realize, well, moving all of our stuff to China took away our defense industrial base and became a national security threat. That was a loss in the long run. Help profits in the short run, loss in the long run. It did help clean up the air, things like that, but that's stuff we would have done anyway, right? When you look at the manufacturing, China's getting cleaner, a lot cleaner. Everyone goes over there like, wow, it's a lot cleaner now. The manufacturing technologies are improving, lighter, okay. Energy sources are cleaner. So that was kind of a loss, right? Again, very short-termist thought. The people that lost their jobs, they didn't find something else to do. They killed themselves. They drank themselves to death. They overdosed on opiates. They overdosed on fentanyl. They died of economic hopelessness. Millions. Another loss. The deaths of those people helped spur a fracturing of our society politically, especially after '08, when we, don't worry, this capitalism for those people. Well, now the wealthy, they're in trouble. They get socialism. Fracture our society. Another loss. And so now these same groups of people, I mean, some of them are literally, they got Tony Blair on the board of this board of peace that Trump's talking about. I'm like, are we stupid? Are we stupid? And that's why I say don't trade your liberty for safety. These people got 4 out of 5 things wrong. And the one thing they got right would have been fixed with a little bit more patience and time anyway, in terms of the clean air. And now these are the people, the groups of people are telling you central bank digital currency and digital ID, and it's all going to be good. Like, okay. Like, are you paying attention? Are you awake yet? We'll see.
Yeah, but you get lattes and you get your yoga mats and, Netflix on safety, Luke. You don't get that with Liberty.
Yeah, I'm wired a little different.
I am too. But that's where people. That's the way people think. I don't even care what part of the country you're in. Like,
and there's nothing like, look, if that's your deal, like that's okay. It really is okay. But then again, there's skin in the game, right? That's fine. If you want to give away your skin in the game, then you give away your skin in the game. And by that I mean, if you become a warden of the state on one level, you shouldn't get the vote. Right? You don't have skin in the game anymore. Your vote has been purchased, therefore you shouldn't have it anymore. And I don't know what that level is. That gets into a whole different political discussion around how much of your vote have you sold, right? How much of a warden of a state are you if you are, receiving health care, receiving UBI, uh, taking a mortgage deduction. I don't know. I don't know what the right, getting a bailout, right? You know, you should be suspended from having lobbying in Washington for 20 years if you ever need a bailout, if you're a bank, right? Something like that. It's astonishing that Washington gives the banks money to bail them out, and then they turn around and lobby Washington. Like, okay, like, but get upset. Oh, listen, that's a lot of fraud over in Minneapolis, sure, and like that's piker stuff compared to what's been going on.
Well, and you bring up UBI. And I've told people if these checks start coming in, and this is where during the pandemic, this was a perfect opportunity to test all this stuff, right? Because you're getting ACHs directly into your bank account. If these dividend checks that they're talking about, these tariff checks, start coming into people's accounts, I don't interpret that as a good thing. It means that this economy is in a really, really, really bad state if they're just putting money into your bank.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about it one way or another. I mean, I think if the money's in theory, it is a way, if our problem is a K-shaped economy, then in theory, these people bring money in from or products in from China and have to pay more money to do so. And if that goes into a pool and then is redistributed here, that can narrow the legs of the K in theory. It's ironic from Trump, it'd be a very socialist redistributive policy. To me, it would make sense on some level if he's not having to borrow the money to do it. That starts to move in the direction of, hey, let's pay, the Henry Ford move. I want to pay my workers more than the market wage so that they can afford to buy the cars that are coming off. The best situation is bring the factories back, pay those people well, have profit margins go down, but profit dollars go up, and have a much more self-contained, stronger, even economy, balanced economy with a strong middle class. That's the best scenario. Between where we are today and that, a solution is, yeah, tariff the heck out of anyone who wants to import something, pool up those tariffs, and then send those out to consumers, because that will sort of make it sustainable and narrow. But to your point, it's not organic. It's not, hey, I'm working a wage. I'm just getting a check for being an American and fogging a glass. And it's better than I think where we are now. But from a sustainability standpoint or from a motivational standpoint, it helps address some of the symptoms, but it doesn't help the fundamental cause per se. It doesn't fix the fundamental cause, I should say.
Last question, short question. Can you share what you're doing in terms of, what you anticipate may or may not occur and where there might be opportunity? And the reason I ask you this, I had a friend of mine that I talked to. He's like, you got to remember, through the Civil War, people came out very successful through that. And that was a very dark time. Doesn't mean that you can't be successful in our individual world, right? Like doing what we do. So can you share?
Sure. Yeah, my friend Grant Williams had a piece in 2018, I think it was, speaking of the Civil War. And I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was a significant businessman in Charleston, South Carolina during the Civil War. And he was essentially one of the key logistics guys. In other words, we blockaded the South, and this guy was running, basically running blockades. He was a blockade runner. Paying people to run ships around the Union ships and bringing in supplies into the South and what have you. And by virtue of that, this guy had a unique insight into the war, right? Because of course the South's telling you, hey, war is going great. Government always tells you all wars are going great according to the government. But this guy's running the supply chains. He knows the war's not going great. And he realizes the South's going to lose. Wars are all about supply chain. And so he stops, he's getting paid in Confederate dollars. And at some point along the process, he starts exchanging every Confederate dollar he gets for gold bullion and goes and buries it somewhere. And of course, South loses, Confederate dollar hyperinflates. All of a sudden, this guy's got all this gold. What does he do? He uses it to help feed the city of Charleston for, you know, months, presumably, if I remember the story right. Keeps people alive. Builds businesses back up in the city of Charleston. Becomes one of the wealthiest men in Charleston, one of the most popular men in Charleston. Lives a long and productive life. And the point here is, yeah, there's always opportunities, and it's critical to be open-eyed about it. This guy wasn't saying, oh, I'm not going to be anti-Confederate and say that we're losing the war and buy gold. He was a realist. He was like Bezos. Well, the data says we're winning. The anecdotes say we're losing. I trust the anecdotes. I'm buying gold. Same thing I'm watching. I was rowing last night. This Vietnam, right? Netflix. They were showing Dan Rather on the ground with the troops. Morley Safer, CBS, on the ground with the troops. These guys went to Saigon. They were young men. Most of the reporters just stayed in Saigon. There was a room where every day the U.S. government stood up, their military read the story, and they dutifully took the notes and said what they said. And most reporters did that. And Rather and Safer, to their credit, said, we want to go get the true story. We want to go get the anecdotes. We want to go out where the action is with the troops. And General Westmoreland called all those other reporters, said they're on the team. He called them on the team. I need you on the team, sticking with the official story. Rather and Safer go out there. Safer is the reporter who took the famous video footage and interviews of the U.S. troops taking the Zippo lighters and lighting the huts on fire and flamethrowing them as these crying villagers. And they got there. They were there as they're getting firefights. They're walking in the village and like, guy goes down. And then they're like, this war isn't going the way they're telling us it's going. And how did they react? Lyndon Johnson, that report hits. The American public, all of a sudden sees for the first time a completely different story than what they were getting. What they called the credibility gap widens. Stop me when this starts to sound familiar. And what happens? The U.S. government does go, oh, Morley Safer, that was great reporting. Nicely done. No. Lyndon Johnson calls the president of CBS the next day and says, are you trying to fuck me? Literally, that's what Johnson says, and says, I want Safer's head now. I want him fired now. CBS, to their credit, would not fire Safer. And so it's just another way of an example. Muhammad Ali, just getting to the session there. Muhammad Ali's heavyweight champion of the world, one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen. Unbelievable. Gets drafted, refuses to go. You just showed the quote last night. I'm not going because no Vietnamese ever called me a N-word. They strip him of his title. They take they bring the man down. In the long run, who was right? Johnson, Westmoreland, the U.S. government, or rather, Safer, Muhammad Ali? 20 years on, who had the better legacy? Safer, rather, Ali. Who had the better careers? Safer, rather, Ali. And so, long-winded way of saying, I get all the time, oh, you're anti-American. You're pro-China. No. I'm just the little boy looking at the emperor going, he ain't got no clothes. I'm Jeff Bezos looking at the anecdotes going, they don't match your data. And I spent 30 years, I spent 20 years in the investment research business. Chapter and verse, I made clients a lot of money trusting the anecdotes over the data. I did it in 08, did it in 07, did it in 10, I saw it over and over. And so I think it's really important that people, as Charlie Munger said, invert, always invert. Look at the anecdotes, look at be objective, use your intuition, because there's great opportunities. So what am I doing? Look, I own a lot of gold. I own very little bonds. I have no debt. I own a little bit of Bitcoin. I plan on buying more back. I think it's going to get cheaper first. Um, I'm, I invest in my community a number of different ways. Um, one of those ways we donate regularly to St. Ignatius, help provide scholarships for young men, both outside of Cleveland and also in their Welsh Academy, which gives a lot of kids that might not otherwise have access to that kind of education access, right? So I believe in Teach a Man to Fish, right? I invest in Teach a Man to Fish in the community. We invest in Give a Man a Fish because there's some people that they need the fish today, right? So the Cleveland Food Bank, we support regularly, and the Cleveland Food Bank supports all the other local food banks around here, and try to build that community. Family, health, like if you don't got your health, you don't have anything. And so invest very much in highest quality food I can, highest quality vitamins, education. My wife does a whole lot with education of just like learning. We've had some health scares, 10 years ago, 12 years ago with her and a couple of our sons in particular, that everything's worked out great in main part because she did a lot of research and came to understand some very big lies about the healthcare sector in this country. And, people are getting paid for things that are not in our interest for health. And yeah, so I think it's really, community, having, community, wealth, family, health, kind of taking this holistic approach and just being open-minded about things. I'm not red team. I'm not blue team. I'm Team America. And, I'm just trying to be as objective. I'm trying to be wise. I want to see things for what they are, not for what they're called. And the more I can do that, the more I think me and my clients and my family are going to be better off for it.
Where can people find you, Luke?
You can find fftt-llc.com for more information about our mass market and institutional products, and Luke Gromen, on X.
As always, thank you for doing this. I encourage everybody to follow Luke, support him. The work he's doing is tremendous, and the fact that he's from Cleveland. And in my eyes, if you're from Cleveland, no matter what, you're okay. People egged Albert Bell's car in the '90s. I was like, well, so what? He plays for Cleveland. I don't care. That's fine. And then once he went to Chicago, I hated him. Thank you for doing this. And for people that, I put all my conversations up early on Substack. If you like what I'm doing and would consider becoming a paid subscriber, that'd be greatly appreciated. And also, I put up on YouTube and Rumble. I read all the comments, as painful as some of them are. If you comment, like, share. And Luke, look forward to the next chat.
Absolutely, likewise. And go Mustangs.
Mic drop.